welcome to another edition of the Umoja Circle. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson, and along with my co-host, Brother Derek Williams, we'd like to welcome you to this portion of the show. This is part two of the topic that we started last week, a topic that we titled Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. And in the last show, we went through a historical interview of what made this such a powerful topic for us, the psychological effect of enslavement and how it affects us even 146 years after the passing of the 13th Amendment, that those 246 years of previous enslavement did have a psychological, a pathological effect. And like any pathology, any trauma, it has a long-lasting, a long historical, a long infection that we're still dealing with to this day.
Absolutely.
We are trying to talk about something that is usually not dealt with in any form. Like I said in the last show, it's sort of like having the 500-pound gorilla in your dining room and trying to ignore the fact that it's there. And we here in America have been dealing with it. And it doesn't only affect the psychology of people of African descent, this post-traumatic slave syndrome, but it also affects the mainstream America.
Absolutely.
Those descendants of those people who are consider themselves white or other ethnic groups that have to deal with this issue because it's a double-edged sword.
Yes.
And what I'm talking about is a condition that anybody who took basic psychology would call the cognitive dissonance.
Yes.
Cognitive dissonance, the human body or the human being cannot deal with two different truths. Conflicting truths.
Yes.
And that causes a dissonance. And a dissonance is a psychological condition where you have to adjust. Your body, you would psychologically eliminate one of those truths.
Because of the discomfort.
Because of the discomfort it caused, the uncomfortable feeling, the guilt, the anger, however it manifests itself. And we're trying to say that America, because of the post-traumatic slave syndrome and the conditions that affected not only the psychology of us who have descended from enslaved people, but the people who mainstream America that are suffering from this cognitive dissonance. You see it manifest itself in many different ways.
Yes.
When we broach this topic is we're in the 21st century. Why do we need to go back to that old thing? That's a form of dealing with the cognitive dissonance. You don't want to face the fact that, for example, it is possible. You've done many different workshops in the past in which at the beginning of the class, you have an individual who is at the basic level.
Yes.
Say somebody who's of not of the African descent, but who wants to know about, what it means to racism and really want to know. So they bring their inexperience and their mythologies in with them, and it's your job as an instructor to introduce them to the realities of the other group.
Yes. Yes.
Now, there is a person of African descent who comes into the same class, but he is through his
another level, huh?
At his experience level, even though the class is class 101 on race relationship, he brings in a class 601 experiential level. And how you have to bridge those two realities is what the role of the instructor. And that's what we're trying to do here at the Umoja Circle. We're trying to make people understand from a people of African descent perspective our historical history, our 601 experience compared to what the mainstream media or the mainstream population have at the 101 level, even those who are willing at least to express it.
Well said, Smoke. Well said. And again, it goes back. Just because something is uncomfortable, it doesn't mean that we can't address it. I think sometimes you talk about I think you were what, a 14?
Mm-hmm.
I wear a 10, and
the analogy of the shoes.
I think you might be a little uncomfortable wearing my shoe.
Yeah, well,
okay.
What he's talking about is that I was trying to find a way to make an analogy about racism and how various different people deal with it, especially people of African descent.
Yes.
For example, I wear size 14 shoes, but because of the condition that I have to traverse, say like enslavement or Jim Crow or some other system, I have to wear something that's pathological in a sense, not fitting. But that's the definition of pathology.
Absolutely.
Any deviation from a healthy condition.
Yes.
So I'm wearing a size 12 shoes. And according to my makeup is how well I deal with that condition.
Yes.
And according to the makeup of various different peoples, how they deal with the condition of enslavement or racism. So just because you might run into a person of African descent who can tolerate the size 12 doesn't guarantee that everybody felt the same way.
Yes.
So those of you who are not of another ethnic group who point to somebody you know who seems to be okay and believe that racism is back then, doesn't mean that we all are satisfied with wearing the size 12 shoes.
That's right.
We need things that fit who we are.
I think that's a good analogy. And as we look at the topic, Smokey, because I know one of the just like in race relations, I'm often told, well, Mr. Williams, why we have to talk about that? Just the mere mentioning of it brings it to a level that we're uncomfortable with. Now, while they may not say that, racism is a topic that certainly is a component of this whole topic of post-traumatic slave syndrome, because it was the subjugation of one group by another in an institution that not only lasted for a very short time, but quite a few centuries. And so we must put it within its proper context and recognize that we are talking about a system that was legalized, which gives question even to the power to put a legal sanction on something that is morally incorrect.
And what we're also saying is that we have to look at enslavement as a pathology.
Yes.
And again, I want to define the pathology. A pathology is any deviation from a healthy condition.
Yes.
And the body politics, or the body of America, had a pathology, a pathological infection that to this day has not been treated.
No, it has not.
And all the different ramifications of that effect is still with us to this day.
Yes.
It is adopted, it has mutated,
yes.
It has become normalized.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean it is the natural state of being. And until we understand that we are, the slavery, the 13th Amendment, again, this is 2011, and it's the 146th anniversary, December 26th of this year, the 146th anniversary of the passing of the 13th Amendment, which by law made us so-called citizens. The reality of it is that the conditions of enslavement did not go away. It just changed names, changed form, became Jim Crow. It became all the redlining, and it became all these other manifestations that did not create a healthy condition for those people and their descendants who were of what we will call the enslaved population, the second-class citizenship. And we're still dealing with this psychological effect, not only to those who were the victims of enslavement, but those who were in the arena, in the same area. It had a double-edged sword because of the cognitive dissonance of what America stood for.
Yes.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Was that written in the 1860s? No, it was written in the 1770s. All right?
Yes.
There is a cognitive dissonance that is affected when you have those founding principles. There are two founding documents of the Americas. There is the Declaration of Independence, which is the core principle that we're supposed to be, make us who we are as a nation. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. And then there was the Constitution, which formed the structure that carried out this principles of we hold these truths to be self-evident. But from 1776 to 1865, that did not exist in America. That principle and the structure that carried out the process that brings to life that principle did not exist. There was a cognitive dissonance by what you said, as I am free, this is the land of the free and the home of the brave, let's move forward, go west, young son, and all those nice terms, and the reality that you have 4 million people that were enslaved. And that's the cognitive dissonance that the other group, the main group of Americans, had to deal with. And you could not, cognitive dissonance cannot deal with two conflicting realities. So you had to ignore a particular reality. You have to blame the other group. Those are the kind of ways that a cognitive dissonance is dealt with. You either ignore, you deny, you blame. But these are all negative responses to a psychological effect.
Yes.
And those psychological effects still exist today, like the person who come to your class and said, why are we talking about this?
Yes.
That's a cognitive dissonant response. That's a pathological response to a true reality that you and I and people in Harlem, people in the Bedford-Stuyvesant, people in Florida are experiencing in their reality. Mainstream America, mainstream media is totally ignoring that reality. And that's been, for the last 146 years, since 1865, that has been the issue. That's been the pathological battle that has been going on psychologically between the black communities and mainstream America.
Yes.
And until we address that truth, we cannot find any kind of prescription that would heal that cognitive dissonance.
Yes. You know, I realize the magnificence in terms of size and proportion of this topic, and I want the viewing audience to know that we recognize that the amount of time that we have is almost an insult to try and address an issue that's been with us for hundreds of years. And what I would like to do is just spend a little time, because we are talking about a psychological model, and for people who have used the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual.
Manual for the psychology,
you know, when we use this term, it's not a term that was just a fancy term. It has its roots in medical application. And that's very important to recognize, because sometimes we have to use medical models in order for us to get a hold of some of the social models and social issues that we're dealing with. But what I'd like to do is spend a few minutes, Smokey, and just looking at, when we talk about the psychological impact, people say, well, you know, that happened a long time ago, Mr. Williams. You know, how can something that happened so long ago manifest itself and express itself today in 2011?
Exactly.
And the way it can, and hopefully by us just reading some of the psychological impact factors from the DSM, we can get a better medical examination of it and see its social application.
Every psychiatrist and every psychologist, when they deal with a patient, refers to the DSM for it's sort of like a blueprint of the psychological terrain that they go through. So that's what they refer to.
And in the manual, when it talks about the post-traumatic syndromes that dominates the DSM or disoriented behavior, let me just read a few, and we can see if we can see its application in a contemporary sense. On the behavior side, intensive psychological distress of exposure to cues that resemble or remind people of a traumatic event. So in other words, seeing a cue, seeing something, and it causing you to remember or be or feel like you're right there when that event occurred. Psychological activity to exposure to the internal or the external event. Marked diminished interest in participating in significant activities. In other words, persons no longer wants to do things. You're just not interested. Feeling of detachment or estrangement from others. Restrictive range of access. In other words, unable to show love or feeling. A sense of a shorter future. Does not expect to have a career, marriage, a future or normal lifespan.
Talk to any gangbanger.
There you go. difficulty of following direction, or staying asleep or awake.
Go to any school.
Absolutely. Irritability or outburst of anger.
And go to any household.
Difficulty of concentration. Hypervigilance. Exaggerated, startled response to situations.
Well, you go to any neighborhood that has gang violence and shots in the night, and you hear gunfire. Go to Watts. Go to certain parts of Pittsburgh. Go to certain parts of New York or L.A. or Miami.
Or the east side.
Or the east side of town. and if you're in those communities, you are constantly vigilant of where you sleep at night.
Yes, and these are symptoms that individuals and groups that have been traumatized find themselves having to deal with. And while Smokey certainly with no intention of geographically assigning these characteristics to particular areas of our country, these are things that we experience in our personal lives as well. We're always questioning and asking, why did I do that? Why don't I feel the same goal orientation in a particular area? So we don't want to give the impression that these are inner city behaviors.
No.
These are behaviors that have impacted our entire nation.
And we always use as an African-centered talk show, we use the model ourselves, our people. But this is something that can transcend many different ethnic groups. So, but being that we're talking about the historical aspect of being black in America, and the pathologies that we have to deal with. Those conditions, those in communities were not formed because we moved over there and that's what we decided to be like that. We were forced into these communities by conditions based on laws. Jim Crow and segregation forced us into these communities. Those who control those communities, those who control the services of those communities, had no interest in the people that worked in there. So they were limited in jobs, limited in some of the social services.
Absolutely.
So he created an environment that produces those type of psychological conditions. These are still manifestation of an enslaved thought process.
Yes.
The post-traumatic slave syndrome that affected not only the people that were the victims, but the people that was the dominant group, because they had that cognitive dissonance and did not want to understand that the society, the system of enslavement and segregation that they created by laws as upstanding communities, even those who did not do the laws, followed the laws.
Absolutely.
You know, if I was in the 1920s and I was in a white community, I might be the greatest understanding person in the world, but if a black person moved into that neighborhood, it would cause problems.
That's right. That's right.
So you see, you had a double-edged sword. You had to cognitively dissonance the discomfort of understanding deep down inside you knew there was another human being.
Yes.
But
yes.
because of the psychological realities or rationalization of the institution, you have to ignore that truth.
That's right.
And any pathological condition doesn't create an unhealthy condition that would normally be healthy. Another healthy condition would be accepting the other human being
Yes.
into your community.
Yes. Yes.
But because they were black, or because they were this, or because they were based on the mythology of enslavement, you had to have a psychological adjustment and denial.
Absolutely.
And that pathology exists to this day.
Yes. And Smokey, I would like to make a suggestion that not only, that we continue with this topic, but that we make it one that we revisit throughout the year.
Yes, because a half an hour is not enough time.
Absolutely.
But we wanted to whet your appetite to this thing called post-traumatic slave syndrome. And if you want to, you go online and Google it, and you'll find the works of Dr. Joy Degruy. You know?
Well, can we spend a little time just talking about some of the expressive forms? And I think that's very important, because as you look at the neighborhood, as you look
Sure.
at many communities,
Sure.
and you see the intense participation by many members, not all members, I want to make that distinction, in self-medicating themselves, either through alcohol,
Exactly.
either through drugs.
Or in a physical way.
In a physical way.
Escape is a form of escapism.
Excessive activity and sexual promiscuity, all sorts of things that there's either going to be an implosion or an explosion. And any condition without treatment is going to manifest itself in a pathological form. And so often when we hear people talking about conditions, we focus on the symptomatic expression, and we don't even bother to ask, where did that come from?
Exactly.
What is the cause? And if nothing else, I would like people to recognize that this topic is not only instructive, but it gives us in our problem solving or our analysis in trying to come up with ways of deterring behavior, to recognize that much of the behavior that we see in fact comes from a period of time that has not only been escalated but passed on.
That's the thing.
But is rooted in a different time and condition that begins to express itself and has been expressing itself since the so-called emancipation.
We use the word civilization, but how could you have a civil, which means peace? Do we have a peaceful culture with the drugs and the guns and the kind of dog-eat-dog kind of reality that we all have to deal with, not only just in the black community, but all throughout America? Oh, every man for himself. Where's that sense of community?
Well, you know, when Gunnar Myrdal, the Swedish psychologist, visited this country back in the
1940s,
the 40s, one of the first things that he saw, as a matter of fact, that's why he wrote his book, The American Dilemma, was he stated that America's problem is this problem with race, is its denial, its refusal to address the conditions.
The 500-pound gorilla in their living room.
That's right. And the thing about that 500-pound gorilla, it will start absorbing and sitting on your couch and going on your table and everything else.
Exactly.
And so many of the conditions that we see today.
It will affect your environment.
That's right.
And then you're going to have a cognitive dissonance. You try to pretend that you're ignoring that truth.
And that's where the denial.
And then you're going to adjust
blaming,
your behavior.
Like you said, the denial, the blaming.
It's affecting us to this day in 2011. Look at our political. We have a president that did all the right things. You know, went to school, brought him out of a single-parent household, reached the ultimate of whatever it is that you say to be the ultimate American, based on that founding principle.
Yes.
All men are created equal.
Yes.
But in the last couple of months, people questioning his birth. Any different than what they question a black slave in 1858, whether he's human or not? His education, they were questioning his education. He's the president of the United States. It had nothing to do with his policies, which you could debate. That's part of the political life. But they used the image and the psychology and the cognitive dissonance, you know, in a negative form to affect his image. And those are the same thing that the World War I soldiers had to do when they went overseas to fight for this country, and they were given to the French because they wasn't afraid that they couldn't handle a gun, even though they handled a gun in the Civil War, you know, and the Spanish-American War before that, or in World War II. When they were told they couldn't fly because they couldn't see, and because of the red tail, the black, you know. Why are we still dealing with those issues, even though historically we showed that we could do anything that any other human being can do? It's the part of that denial. And
it's part of that legacy, and it also speaks to the continuation of something that we don't want to recognize as still being with us, and that's racism. And as far as I'm concerned, Smokey, racism is a mental illness in and of itself.
That's what I'm saying. That's the pathology. It's a pathological condition.
And so as we talk about how can we utilize this information, we can utilize this information, first of all, by considering it as part of our problem-solving approach. We cannot move from A to B without addressing the age-old problem that this country continues to not address, and that is its legacy and its history of slavery and its mistreatment of one of the largest ethnic groups in the nation. And until we do, we are going to continue to find ourselves in this cognitive dissonance pattern of blame, of finding reasons
to ignore the truth
that don't have any rhyme or significance as to why the behavior continues with each passing generation. There's been a lot of generations.
146 years since the 13th Amendment.
That have come and gone, that are still enduring conditions that are pathologically very similar to the time of slavery. And until we began to address the cancer, the boil, or the 500-pound gorilla, we are going to find ourselves in a cycle of repeating.
If you don't treat an infection, will it stop?
No, it won't. It will spread, and it's spreading.
That's
it's spreading, and it's spreading.
And that's why we're speaking this truth.
And our popularity among other countries, let's keep that in mind, because they look to us, Smokey. So many countries look to us as the model, and if we don't perfect one of the most important models, then I'm afraid that we're going to lose that status.
We call this cognitive dissonance as a result of not listening to the truth.
Yes. And
that's the truth that usually in a cognitive dissonance you go to the non-truth, because it's usually it's called another psychological term called cognitive disequilibrium, and that means that you have a new truth.
Yes. And
it's in competition with the old truth that you've always been grounded in. And you're having difficulty dealing with this new information that is actually truer than the fact of the illusion or the mythology that you initially did. And that, again, is what we're up against. And if you don't face that truth, you'll never treat. We're talking about prescription. You have to face truth in order to deal with alcoholic. Got to face the truth of his alcoholism. A drug addict first got to face the truth of his alcoholism, and a person who is suffering from cognitive dissonance, America must face the truth of its history. And then find the true prescription. Otherwise, the illusion is not going to be a prescriptive thing, and we're living in the illusion right now.
Well said.
And that's what we're trying to speak here at the Umoja Circle. We speak the truth.
Well, to have a moral dilemma and to take an equal or a neutral stance on it, I think, is one of the greatest crimes that we can commit. And we do have a moral dilemma, and that dilemma is based in our inability and unwillingness to address our past. And until we address our past and enact programs that can bring about some compensatory aspects to it, then I think we'll see these conditions continue to exist for a long time.
And we understand in the Umoja Circle, that's why we speak this truth, that though a fact might be truthful and a fact might be timely, if the group that you're speaking to do not have the mental capacity to accept that truth, then the truth will be missed.
Wow. Well said, Smoke. Well
and
said.
We are just trying to speak that truth, and we hope you do not miss it. This is what we do here at the Umoja Circle. And we got less than 15 seconds. Any closing remarks?
I know it's been a difficult topic, and we'll return to it. And the thing that I believe is that all new birth requires pain. And with that,
peace, Hotep, bye-bye.